During this wonderful day of rest, I can't think of a better subject in the share than the Sabbath. The Sabbath is one of the clearest anchors Yahweh places into Scripture's storyline, an anchor in time that keeps his people from drifting into the belief that life with God is sustained by constant activity, constant production, or constant religious output. When you read the Torah straight through, the logic moves with a steady rhythm. Creation leads to the seventh day. The seventh day becomes covenant life, and covenant life is then framed, very intentionally, around the building of the tabernacle, so that Israel learns a critical lesson that still applies for believers today. Even the holiest work must never replace holy rest, because holiness is not something we manufacture. It's something the Most High gives by His presence and by His sanctifying power. Shalom. My name is Trey Daniels, and I welcome you to this episode of Full Access Ministries. It begins before a sanctuary made with hands. It begins before priesthood. It begins before Sinai. It begins before Israel exists. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished, along with everything in them. On the seventh day, God was finished with His work that He had made. So on the seventh day, He rested from all His work. Genesis 2:1 and 2. And then Torah says something that sets the direction for everything that follows. So God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because on it He rested from all His work which God created for making. Genesis 2:3. The very first thing directly called sanctified in Scripture is not a structure. It is a day. Yahweh sets apart time. He inserts holiness into the calendar, and He does it on the seventh day. That means the Sabbath is not merely an end to a busy week. It's part of creation's shape and message, and you can hear that message even in the creation chapter's recurring pattern. And there is an evening and there is a morning. Day 1, Genesis 1:5. That evening-morning rhythm is not poetic. It points to the way the Bible commonly reckons a day, moving from evening into morning. Later, Torah states this evening-to-evening framework explicitly. From evening until evening, you are to keep your Shabbat. Leviticus 23:32. So when Scripture talks about the seventh day, it's speaking about a real, defined day within a biblical rhythm of time, not some vague spiritual idea that floats wherever we want it. And because God sanctifies a day before He sanctifies a building, Shabbat becomes something like a sanctuary in time. Holiness you can enter without having to travel, construct, or achieve. Before there's an altar, there is rest. Before there's a priesthood, there is sanctified time. Before there's a tabernacle made with hands, there is a day that God Himself blesses and makes holy. Time becomes the first set-apart space, and that matters for every generation, especially for God's people in exile, pressure, dispersion, because sanctified time cannot be confiscated by an empire. Then Torah takes that creation anchor and fastens it into covenant life. Remember Yom Shabbat, to keep it holy. Exodus 28. Not notice it sometimes. Remember it, because you will be pressured to forget it. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Shabbat to Adonai your God. On it you shall not do any work. Exodus 29 and 10. The very next verse states that the reason is creation, stated plainly, for in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore Adonai blessed Yom Shabbat and made it holy. Exodus 20:11. The seventh-day Sabbath is never presented as a human tradition. It's presented as a divine pattern rooted in the Creator's own actions and then commanded into the life of His covenant people. And Torah repeats the Sabbath command with an additional anchor, redemption. You must remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and Adonai your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore Adonai your God commanded you to keep Yom Shabbat. Deuteronomy 5:15. This means that Shabbat is not only about creation, it's also about freedom. It is a weekly declaration that God's people are not Pharaoh's property, whether Pharaoh is an ancient king or a modern set of internal taskmasters like fear, drivenness, or identity built on performance. Shabbat trains the soul to live as the redeemed, not as driven by scarcity, not mastered by anxiety, not ruled by the never-enough economy of Egypt. Now we carry that logic forward into the tabernacle, because this is where the Sabbath becomes a guardrail around worship itself. God's desire is not only that Israel obey, it is that he dwell among them. Let them make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them, Exodus 25:8. And then the Torah gives a long sustained set of instructions: holy architecture, holy furniture, holy garments, holy service. But at the very point where you might expect the instructions to climax with urgency, work harder, faster, more, God places Shabbat as the seal on the entire project. Surely you are to keep my Shabbatot, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, so that you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you. Exodus 31:13. That's the heart of the matter. The tabernacle can never become a machine for self-made holiness. The Sabbath sign declares the opposite direction. God sanctified his people. The Sabbath is the weekly confection that holiness is received and lived out, not manufactured by religious busyness. And the Torah presses the point again. It is a sign between me and Bnei Israel, for in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he ceased from the work and was refreshed. Exodus 31:17. Notice what does not happen within this story. The sign does not shift to a different day. The narrative does not announce a change of sanctified time. The 7th-day Sabbath remains the stated sign, and it remains tied back to the creation pattern. Then comes the moment of action. Construction begins. But Moses does not start with a building schedule. He starts with Shabbat. These are the things that Adonai has commanded you to do. Then immediately, 6 days' work may be done, but the 7th day shall be holy for you, a Shabbat of complete rest to Adonai. Exodus 35:1-2. The tabernacle is about to be built, yet God's first word over the building is not do more, but stop rightly. And that stop is not emptiness, it's direction to worship, to Adonai. Shabbat is framed as holy relational rest that acknowledges God's authority and presence. The Torah then shows the people giving and building with willing hearts. Everyone whose heart stirred him and everyone whose spirit moved him came and brought Adonai's offering, Exodus 35:21. It shows that the craftsmanship is not merely human talent, it's God-enabled skill. He has filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and in all manner of craftsmanship, Exodus 35:31. This is important for the Sabbath logic. Even the ability to build holy things is portrayed as a gift. So Shabbat is not Yahweh holding Israel back. Shabbat is him teaching Israel to build without becoming enslaved to building, to work without worshiping work, to serve without turning service into identity. Then the work reaches completion. So Moses finished the work, Exodus 40:33, and the climax is not human celebration, but divine presence. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Adonai filled the tabernacle, Exodus 40:34. The point lands with weight. Israel can obey what God commands, but it cannot produce the glory. The glory comes from Yahweh alone. Holiness flows from the Most High to his people, and the Sabbath sign, so that you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you, is planted into the tabernacle narrative precisely so his chosen people will not mistake religious productivity for sanctification. That brings us to the modern believer. Because this same temptation still exists, we can make holy activity into a substitute for Holy Communion. We can fill our lives with work for God and lose the steady knowledge that God is the one who sanctifies. The New Covenant scriptures define or describe believers in dwelling place language. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells among you? 1 Corinthians 3:16. That doesn't erase the Torah's message. It intensifies the pastoral need for it. If Adonai dwells among his people, then we must be especially careful not to replace relationship with output. Sabbath practice becomes a weekly way of living the tabernacle lesson without the wilderness tent. Yahweh's presence and sanctification are our gifts. Our obedience is real, but our obedience is not the source of our holiness. Surely you are to keep my Shabbatot, so that you may know that I am Adonai who sanctifies you. Shabbat becomes an embodied confession. Adonai is the creator, is the deliverer, is the sanctifier. This means that I can stop, trust, worship, and delight in him. And this is where Hebrews deepens, not replaces, the Torah's message. Hebrews does not float rest as a vague spirituality. It anchors rest in the same creation text we began with. For he has spoken somewhere about the seventh day in this way, and God rested on the seventh day from all his works. Hebrews 4:4. Hebrews takes the storyline seriously. Creation rest, Israel in the wilderness, and ongoing today of God's voice. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Hebrews 4:7. In other words, the danger is not merely fatigue, the danger is hardness. Hearing God and resisting him, while still imagining we're fine because we're busy or religious. So Hebrews presses the same tabernacle lesson into the inner life. There's a promised rest for unbelief that unbelief can refuse, and there's a rest that faith enters. So we see that we are not able to enter because of unbelief. Hebrews 3:19. Then the invitation comes forward into the present. Let us therefore strive to enter that rest so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. Hebrews 4:11. That striving is not the striving of self-salvation. It's the seriousness of faith and obedience, refusing the wilderness pattern of mistrust, refusing the Pharaoh pattern of drivenness, refusing the lie that we can secure life by our own output. And then Hebrews states, in no uncertain terms, so then there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for whoever has entered God's rest has also rested from his works as God did from his. Hebrews 4:9 and 10. The weekly Shabbat remains a sign in time, and Hebrews shows it, pointing beyond itself to the deeper reality it has always trained us for. Ceasing from the self-justifying works, ceasing from anxious striving, and learning to live by trust in the one who sanctifies. Not less obedience, truer obedience. The obedience that flows from faith instead of fear. And Hebrews also guards the seventh day with a final layer of tabernacle wisdom. Our confidence is not in our performance, but in our high priest. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens. Yeshua, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. Hebrews 4:14. If Shabbat teaches us that holiness cannot be manufactured, Hebrews teaches us how we can draw near without pretending. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in the time of need. Hebrews 4:16. Shabbat doesn't become a weekly attempt to impress Adonai, but a weekly returning to mercy, to grace, to trust, to worship, to the one who sanctifies. Practically, this means Shabbat is not best treated as an accidental collapse at the end of an exhausting week. Torah calls it something else, a Shabbat of complete rest to Adonai, Exodus 35:2. That implies intention. It implies preparation. It implies that you decide ahead of time, I will honor God, or I will honor what God has sanctified. You arrange what you reasonably can in 6 days, not with panic, but with wisdom, because the goal is not merely to stop working, but to turn toward our Redeemer. Shabbat lived as Scripture presents it is a day to remember creation, remember redemption, worship, pray, read, rejoice, gather, and recenter your household around the truth that you are not slaves. And Hebrews adds, it is also a day to practice entering God's rest with a soft heart, responding to today with faith, not with hardness. I hold to what Scripture states and frames. Adonai set apart the seventh day at creation. God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, Genesis 2:3. He then commanded it in the covenant. The seventh day is a Shabbat to Adonai your God, Exodus 20:10. And he placed Shabbat like a guardrail around the building of his dwelling. Surely you are to keep my Shabbatot, so that you may know that I am Adonai, who sanctifies you. When I read the tabernacle story, I hear God warning me that even holy work must not replace holy trust, because presence is my gift. His sanctifying power is not produced by my effort. And when I read Hebrews, I hear the same God calling me to carry that lesson forward and inward, so that I don't repeat the wilderness pattern of unbelief, but enter his rest by faith and obedience. I practice Shabbat as Scripture speaks it, a Shabbat of complete rest to Adonai. I receive it as worshipful rest, rest that turns my attention to God, not just to stop working. I prepare as I am able in the 6 days, and then I stop in obedience on the seventh day, because the point is not merely recovery. The point is covenant faithfulness and remembrance, creator, redeemer, sanctifier. And when I'm tempted to measure my worth by my own output, Shabbat corrects me again with the covenant sign. I am Adonai, who sanctifies you. And Hebrews corrects me again with a deeper invitation. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And this rest is entered by faith, not earned by striving to prove myself. It's a modern belief that Sunday or the first day of the week is somehow the new Sabbath. But this doctrine is not scripturally accurate. When Scripture mentions believers gathering on the first day of the week, we need to stick with what the text actually says and to the Torah's own day boundaries. Torah gives an explicit evening to evening framework. From evening until evening, you are to keep your Shabbat. So when Acts says, now on the first day of the week, we gathered to break bread, and he prolonged his speech till midnight, and then there adds, there were great many lamps burning in the upper room where we met, Acts 27-8. This speaks of an evening gathering that fits the biblical way of counting time, without forcing it into a later modern calendar assumption. I will also say plainly what Scripture does not say. These first day references are never presented as a command that redefines Shabbat or transfers its sanctification to another day. Scripture continues to define Shabbat as the seventh day. The Gospels still treat Shabbat as a recognized, commanded day. As was his custom, he went into the synagogue on Shabbat, Luke 4:16. And even after Yeshua's death, on Shabbat they rested according to the commandment, Luke 23:56. All throughout the book of Acts, Paul is constantly teaching in the synagogues on the Sabbath. He is recorded in the apostolic writings that he continued to do this approximately 84 times. Acts 13 and 16 give several accounts, in addition to his staying 18 months in Corinth, which is no less than 78 Sabbaths. His reference for the Sabbath was always day 7. Revelation 1:10 refers to the Lord's Day, but never once links it to the first day of the week. That is a Roman interpretation, not a scriptural one. In fact, there is no claim whatsoever in the entirety of God-breathed Scripture that changed the Sabbath from anything other than the seventh day. Scripture defines it, names it, and anchors it where it anchors it, in creation, then in covenant. This is why I can live this forward as a modern believer with tabernacle wisdom. I can build and serve, but I cannot manufacture God's glory. I can obey and prepare room, but Adonai is the one who fills and sanctifies. I honor the seventh day Shabbat as Scripture presents it, and I let it keep me free from Pharaoh's rhythm, free from performance-based spirituality, free to worship, and free to trust that God who creates, redeems, and sanctifies his people. And because Scripture calls me to hear his voice today, Shabbat becomes a weekly practice of soft-hearted faith, to cease from self-reliance and to enter God's rest, to hold fast my confession and to draw near for mercy and grace, because we have a great high priest, Yeshua, the Son of God. Until next time, Shalom, shalom.